She needed a date for Christmas. So her billionaire boss said pretend it's me, and Lydia just wanted to survive Christmas with no pity. No awkward questions, and definitely no ex showing up with his perfect new girlfriend. But when one little lie she told to protect herself threatens to unravel everything. The last man she ever expected offers to help. Her boss? Cold, untouchable, and about to change everything. And before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now let's get back to the story. Oh wow, he's actually bringing her. Lydia didn't mean to say it out loud, but the words slipped out, soft, stunned, and raw, right in the middle of the open plan office. Heads didn't exactly turn, but one did. Ethan Ashford looked up from across the floor, the CEO himself, sharp-suited, eyes like the kind of man who never acknowledged small talk, let alone emotional outbursts, and Lydia froze, her cheeks flushed not from the cold draft sneaking through the windows, but from the deep wave of embarrassment rising up her neck as she turned back to her desk, pretending to type, pretending to breathe, pretending to be invisible while her heart was thudding in her ears, because she knew what had triggered it. The message blinking on her phone moments ago saying, "Hey Lyd, just wanted to let you know I'm bringing someone to the family dinner, hope that's okay." Hope that's okay? Jason, her ex-fiancé. Actually, who'd ghosted her 3 weeks before the wedding 2 years ago and was now RSVPing to her family's Christmas Eve dinner with a new girlfriend like it was nothing. Like her heart hadn't shattered in that very dining room. And the worst part was she'd told her mother she was bringing someone too just to save face and keep Aunt Carolyn from doing that voice again. "Oh sweetie, still single, but you're such a pretty girl." So Lydia blinked back, the sting in her eyes, and tried to focus on her screen, but the words blurred and her fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard until a quiet, deep, polished voice behind her asked, "Are you all right?" And she looked up slowly to see Ethan Ashford standing there, tall and unreadable, with every button of his charcoal gray coat fastened and his steel watch catching the afternoon light. Not a hair out of place. A man who didn't usually come to this side of the floor or speak unless it was business. And Lydia straightened in her chair and said, "Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anything." Her voice softer than she meant as she explained it was a personal message. And he nodded slowly as if filing it away, but to her surprise he didn't leave and instead glanced at her desk at the little snow globe with a tiny silver house inside surrounded by painted pine trees sitting beside her laptop. Her favorite thing always off to the side. And he asked, "Is that a snow globe?" And she blinked and said, "Yes, my grandmother gave it to me." And he didn't smile exactly, but something softened around his eyes, a rare warmth flickering. And then he said, "If you need someone, then pretend it's me." The words hitting her chest like thunder as she stared and said, "What?" And he replied, "You said you're expected to bring someone, and I assume your ex is trying to make a statement, so make one back." And Lydia laughed nervously and said, "You're joking." And he said, "I'm not, Mr. Ashford, I couldn't possibly. You're a valued employee." And he answered that if she needed help managing a social situation, he was willing to step in, but it had to look real. And she opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again as he already turned to leave, until she said wait and stopped him, asking why he would do that and what he'd get out of pretending to be her date. And he looked at her fully then as something unreadable passed through his eyes, and a pause stretched between them before he said, "Let's just say I'm not particularly fond of men who humiliate women in public." The calm weight of the words making her swallow. And she said, "But everyone will see." And he replied, "I'll make it clear it's by choice. If you want me there, I'll be there. If not, we never speak of it again." And he turned to leave but paused and said, "Think about it, but decide soon." And just like that he was gone, leaving Lydia staring after him with her heart still racing. Her heart was still pounding and her world felt tilted at a strange new angle, and the next day everything looked normal again. Or at least pretended to be, with people bustling through the office holding paper cups of holiday coffee and tinsel sprouting like weeds from every desk divider, while Lydia tried to keep her head down even though her mind refused to cooperate. The snow globe on her desk caught the light, a small reminder of warmth, of family, and of how badly she did not want to face Christmas alone. At lunch, she slipped out to the cafe downstairs, half full and humming with the usual clink of cutlery and murmured conversations, ordered soup, sat by the window, and stared into it like it might offer an answer. And then without a sound he sat across from her. Ethan, no entourage, no assistant, just him. She blinked, wondering if she had forgotten a meeting, realizing she had not, and asking why he was there, and he said she had not answered him. She hesitated and asked if he was serious, and he said he did not say things he did not mean, and after a beat she asked if he would really come to her family dinner and eat pie with her aunt who grilled people about their 5-year plans, and he replied deadpan that he was excellent at small talk, which made her raise an eyebrow and tell him he did not even do small talk, and he said then it would be a Christmas miracle, and that made her laugh quietly and unexpectedly, like she had not realized he could be even a little funny, and it slipped out before she could stop it, and for the first time in months she did not feel like crying when she thought about Christmas. She really looked at him then, the sharp suit, the impossible calm, and the fact that he had shown up for her, and she swallowed hard and said okay, and when his eyes flicked up she told him she would take him up on the offer but just for one night, and he nodded once and said it was a deal, and she could not believe this was happening or that she was really going to bring her CEO as her date, and as she picked up her spoon, still stunned and half numb, she whispered more to herself than to him, that this better not blow up in her face, and without looking up from stirring his coffee, he told her not to let it. The next morning the office buzzed louder than usual, not because anything had changed but because everything had, and Lydia was not the kind of person people gossiped about since she kept to herself, worked hard, smiled when spoken to, and never stepped out of line until now, and it started with small glances and lifted eyebrows before the whispers about whether that was really Ethan Ashford with her at lunch and whether they had been laughing and maybe she was related to someone on the board. Lydia kept her head down and her fingers moving on the keyboard, but her heart had not slowed since yesterday because she had said yes and agreed to pretending that Ethan Ashford, CEO of Ashford and Hart, the man with more titles than smiles, was her boyfriend for Christmas dinner, and she wondered what she was thinking as her screen blurred and she blinked back the thoughts, noticing her snow globe shimmer beside her laptop, the tiny silver house floating inside with snowflakes that never touched the ground, just like her, suspended in between. Then a message popped up from Ethan Ashford with the subject "The rules meet me, conference room 6, 10:15 sharp," and she checked the clock and felt her stomach flip because he was already there when she walked in, coat off, sleeves rolled, one paper cup of coffee on the table, gesturing to the seat across from him and telling her he had taken the liberty of ordering hers with almond milk, no sugar, and a cinnamon sprinkle, which made her freeze and ask how he knew her coffee order, and he said he ran a company and knew everyone's coffee order, which was not reassuring even though the warmth in the cup was. She sat carefully and he leaned forward with his fingers interlaced like this was a quarterly review and said they needed ground rules, explaining that if they were doing this it needed to look real with a backstory and details so he would not say Die Hard if her cousin asked his favorite Christmas movie, which made her blink and ask if that was his favorite, and he said no, it was The Godfather, but that was not the point, and when she said he was taking this seriously, he met her gaze and said, if he showed up at her family's home pretending to be her partner, and it looked fake it would reflect badly on her, and he would not allow that. And something in his calm certainty tightened her chest as she thanked him softly and he nodded and laid out the rules, saying they met 3 months ago through mutual friends, kept it quiet, and she had been nervous about dating after her ex, which she admitted was not far from the truth, then added that she liked to bake and he liked to eat what she baked, making her raise a brow and ask if he was planning to request a cookie demonstration. And he replied that his mother used to say the way to win a holiday table was through the dessert tray. Just as she echoed his words and realized how real this was becoming, he paused and then offered the smallest nod and said she passed a long time ago, and something softened between them as Lydia sipped her coffee and told him she was sorry and that it must have been hard, and he answered simply that it was, and they let the quiet settle until he broke it by saying third rule, physical contact, which nearly made her choke on her drink as she asked him to excuse himself. And he explained that if someone hugged her he would need to look like he belonged, holding her hand or putting a hand on her back, that it had to be natural, and Lydia flushed not because it was inappropriate but because it was too appropriate, too thought out, too considerate, too much for someone who was not supposed to care, and yet here he was preparing to protect her reputation in front of her entire extended family with coordinated hand placement, which made her mutter that this was the most romantic fake thing she had ever done. And his mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile as he told her she had not even heard the fourth rule, which made her groan that there was more, and he leaned back and said one more, explaining that if it ever became too much, the pretending, the closeness, the pressure, she only had to say one word and they would walk with no questions and no damage, that she would lead and he would follow, and Lydia looked at him, the most powerful man in the building, offering her the power and the exit just like that. And when she asked what the word was he considered and said something festive, eggnog, which made her laugh, a real warm, unguarded laugh that echoed slightly in the glass-walled room while he watched her with something unreadable in his eyes. And when her laughter faded, she whispered that he was not what she thought, and when he asked what she thought she told him she thought he was cold and unreachable, the kind of man who would not even notice someone like her, and he did not blink as he told her he noticed everything, Lydia, which made her heart stutter too fast and too deep until his phone buzzed and he glanced at it and stood, saying he had a meeting in 5 and would send her the draft of their story with names, dates, and shared memories for her to read. That night, because Christmas Eve was in 4 days, and she nodded and said okay, and as he walked to the door he paused and said without looking back that he was not going to go anywhere this year and was just going to work alone, and she tilted her head as he added that now he was not, and then he left, leaving Lydia sitting there clutching her warm cup of coffee and feeling the exact moment her life shifted on its axis, not because of the pretending but because somehow the most untouchable man she knew had just admitted he was lonelier than anyone suspected. And later Lydia stood frozen in her tiny kitchen with her phone to her ear and a wooden spoon dangling in the air like a forgotten thought as she told her mother no, he was not just a coworker but someone she had been seeing quietly, followed by silence and then her mother's breathy H traveling down generations like an heirloom as she said that was surprising because Aunt May saw her alone at church last month. And Lydia sighed and switched off the stove explaining they were not ready then, followed by another pause before her mother asked about this boyfriend and his name again. And when Lydia said Ethan there was a beat and then not Ethan Ashford, and she closed her eyes too late as her mother gasped theatrically and exclaimed Lydia Marie Rowan, the CEO, and Lydia answered yes mother, that Ethan, followed by a thud that was probably her mother sitting down in her knitting chair as she asked if Lydia was bringing Ethan Ashford, the man from the Forbes cover, to Christmas Eve dinner as her date, and Lydia rubbed her temples and begged her not to post it on Facebook only to hear too late as she felt the glittering storm forming in the family group chat, tried to distract her by asking about her dad's sugar level, was told not to change the subject and to tell Grandma she was bringing dessert, and replied that she was bringing a billionaire before the line clicked dead. And she decided it could have gone worse, and that night she made dinner, something simple, mushroom risotto with thyme and parmesan, one of the few recipes she could do with her eyes closed because she needed normal warmth and a soft place to land, when there was a knock at the door after he texted like he always did, reminding her she had texted him earlier asking if he could come over for 30 minutes to run through the details before she got grilled alive by her entire family. And she opened the door to find Ethan standing there, not in a suit but in a charcoal knit sweater with a black coat open and a deep blue scarf loosely wrapped that she had never seen before, and his eyes flicked to hers as he said she smelled like rosemary and existential dread, which made her huff a laugh and step aside to invite him in, revealing her small cozy slightly chaotic apartment with books stacked 2 layers deep on every shelf, throw pillows that did not match, and a crocheted blanket tossed over the arm of the couch made by her grandma before she passed. The same grandma who had given her the snow globe. Ethan noticed it on her side table and walked over, picking it up with surprising care, and Lydia said softly without being prompted that she gave it to her when she turned 18 and said she would understand its meaning when she felt stuck in life, and he turned it upside down so the snow fell gently, and asked if she did, and she gave a crooked smile and said every day, and he set it down carefully before looking at the dining table and asking if she made dinner, and she said it was just risotto, which genuinely surprised him as he asked if she cooked, and she handed him a plate and said she panic cooks as a coping mechanism and he was the beneficiary, and they sat opposite each other at her small round table with candles flickering mostly for the smell of cinnamon and pine, and he took a bite and paused before saying it was excellent, which made her eyes widen as she asked if he was serious, and he nodded and said it was rich and balanced and the rice was not overdone and that he had eaten at every 5-star restaurant in London and would still ask for seconds, and she blinked and asked if he just complimented her, and he reminded her that he also said her apartment smelled like dread and that balance mattered, and she grinned, and for a moment they both forgot it was pretend, and forgot the rules and were just 2 people eating real food and sharing a real moment, and she admitted softly with her eyes on her plate that she was worried he would regret this and that it would be awkward, and he leaned back sipping his water and said it was not awkward and he did not regret it, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable but stretched like a soft sweater that was warm and worn in and safe, and she took another bite with her heart fluttering until her phone buzzed and she reached for it and her stomach dropped when she saw it was from Abby, her younger sister, with a screenshot attached that read Lydia Rowan bringing the Ethan Ashford to her family's Christmas. This cannot be real. We love a festive plot twist. CEO crush June Ashford affair. Yes, holiday hot tea. And she whispered oh no as Ethan raised his brow and asked what it was, and she turned the screen so he could see and he read it once and then again and something flickered behind his eyes that was not anger or shock but something close to preparation, and he stood and said he would handle it, which made her blink and ask what that meant and whether he was going to sue someone for gossip, and he said no as he grabbed his coat and said he was going to make it real, and she stood too with her pulse climbing and said Ethan, and he paused at the door meeting her eyes fully and said that if the story was out there, he would not let it humiliate her, and that either they stayed quiet or stepped into it completely. And she opened her mouth, but nothing came out as he said he would call her tomorrow, and hesitated a beat before saying he meant it and did not regret this. And then he left, closing the door gently behind him and leaving Lydia staring after him with her heart racing faster than ever, because he had not just played along that night and had meant every word. And Lydia did not sleep and spent most of the night staring at the ceiling while the city pulsed softly outside. Her window and shadows from passing cars danced across the walls, and the snow globe beside her bed glimmered every time her phone lit up with a new notification. Because the post had gone viral, not world-ending viral, but enough with a few hundred shares, wide-eyed comments, and worst of all a tag from her cousin Bella saying, "Girl, explain now, CEO crush." And she groaned into her pillow, knowing this was not the plan and never was, because she had wanted one quiet night and a little dignity and a seat at the table without being the girl left again. But now she was trending not by name but by implication and proximity to him, and he said he would handle it whatever that meant. And at 8:03 the next morning there was a knock at her apartment door, because he knocked like he always did, and she rushed to open it with her heart in her throat to find Ethan there with his scarf pulled loose and hair dusted with snow, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. And she blinked and said he remembered her order again, and he said he noticed things as he handed her the warm cup and walked past her into the apartment like he had done it a dozen times, even though he had not, and it did not feel strange. And he was already shedding his coat and pulling out his phone and reading something as he said he had just left the PR office and they drafted a statement. And her voice went dry as she repeated a statement, and he said yes to make it clear they were not hiding, with no interviews and no details. Just quiet confirmation. And he looked up and said he would not say a word unless you agree. And Lydia stared at him, because this man who did not even chat in elevators was about to go on the record for her. So she asked quietly why he was doing this, and he did not answer right away, but instead walked to her bookshelf and picked up the snow globe again and told her to turn it over and watch the snowfall, reminding her, she said, it was about feeling stuck. And she nodded slowly as he admitted he had felt that way for a long time too, that even with all the success and titles he had been frozen. And he set it down carefully and said then she walked into his office with cinnamon on her collar and eyes like she would rather disappear than ask for help, which made her flush. And he said suddenly he did not want to be frozen anymore, and the room grew quiet in a way that felt full and charged, and Lydia stepped forward with her fingers tightening around her cup and said she never asked him to fix anything, and he replied more softly that he was not trying to fix her. He was standing beside her, and that was different. And just like that her throat tightened, because she had spent so long holding herself up through broken engagements and sideways glances and family pity that she did not know what to do with someone who simply stood beside her. So she whispered what the statement said, and he handed her the phone, and it was short and clean and professional, saying, "Mr. Ethan Ashford confirms he is currently in a relationship and respectfully asks for privacy regarding his personal life with no further comments." And she read it again and said out loud, "in a relationship," noting how definitive it sounded. And he nodded and said if they were doing this it needed to look real, which made her pulse jump as she asked if he was okay with people thinking she was his. And he said gently that he wanted them to, and the room tilted just enough to steal her breath, because this was not about saving face anymore, maybe not even for her, and she murmured she did not want to embarrass him, and he told her she could not even if she tried, and by noon the story had shifted and the gossip slowed and the hashtags softened into power couple alert and Ethan Ashford confirms relationship just before Christmas and who is the mystery woman. And her phone buzzed constantly, but none of it panicked her until a message from Abby said she might want to call Grandma because she told Pastor Jim they were getting married, which made Lydia choke on her tea. And that night she met Ethan at the office, where it was quiet after hours like a cathedral, and he waited in his corner office with his tie loosened and jacket folded as she stepped in breathless, saying Pastor Jim thought they were engaged. And he raised an eyebrow and asked if they needed a ring too, and she told him not to joke even as she laughed, and he smiled slightly and told her to come here. And she crossed the room without thinking, and he brushed a snowflake from her hair and his hand lingered, and they were too close but not close enough, and she broke the moment by asking why he really said yes to this, and his reply was so quiet she barely heard it when he said it was because he wanted a reason to stay in her life. And the silence after that was heavy and real until his phone buzzed and his jaw tightened as he showed her a photo of them from last night taken through her window with candles and risotto and him laughing and a caption that said "looks real to me," which made her heart drop as she asked if it was bad. And he said no but darkened and said it was just started. And she stepped closer and said they could still back out. And he told her no and that he did not want to. And Lydia had not expected to wake up the next morning to knocking again on a Saturday barely past dawn with her head fogged by dreams and holiday chaos and the surreal truth that she now existed in tabloid airspace. So she wrapped herself in a thick cardigan and opened the door to Ethan holding a brown paper bag and coffee, and she blinked and asked if they were in a breakfast phase now, and he smirked and said he figured since they were convincing the world they were inseparable, should at least bring bagels. And she stepped aside smiling and said if you were going to fake date me Ashford you are setting the bar dangerously high. And he said he was aware as he passed her a steaming cup and said hazelnut cinnamon sprinkle no sugar. And she looked up and asked seriously how do you remember that? And he said he remembers what matters in a soft warm voice that made her look away. And they sat at her little table again in the same chairs but with different light as morning sunlight spilled through the window catching the golden flecks in her hair and making Ethan look almost relaxed. And she bit into a toasted sesame bagel and said she assumed he did not come just to feed her. And he wiped a crumb from his thumb and said he had a car waiting downstairs and thought they could go shopping, which made her frown and ask shopping. And he said for Christmas Eve, and she tilted her head and asked if he did not think her sapphire dress was good enough, and he said no it was perfect but thought they could pick something together, a gift for her parents. And she hesitated and said he did not have to because it was just pretend remember. And he met her gaze and said he knew it started that way but her family was opening their home to him and he wanted to show respect. And something in her chest shifted because he was not playing anymore and it scared her how much that meant. And later that morning they walked through a quiet boutique downtown with wooden floors, pine garlands, and a silver bell chiming softly as they entered. The air smelling like cedar and vanilla. And Ethan moved with quiet precision studying each item while Lydia watched him while pretending not to. Noticing the way his hand brushed a scarf and how he paused at a delicate glass ornament shaped like a house, and he held it up and asked what about this, saying it reminded him of her snow globe. And she smiled surprised and said you remembered that too. And he answered immediately that he remembered her. And the ornament went into the bag gift wrapped with no tag and she did not ask who it was really for. And back at her apartment they shared the last 2 bagels now cold but still comforting as she murmured that she did not know what her parents were going to think. And he asked if she meant her parents, and she nodded and said they would be polite but have questions and expectations especially after the gossip, and he said they could ask and he would answer. And when she looked at him he said if they asked why a man like him would be with someone like her, he would tell them the truth that he admired her, trusted her, and had never felt more seen, which caught her breath because that was not in the fake dating script and he knew it. And she looked down at her hands and said he did not have to keep protecting her because she could handle her family and gossip and had handled worse, and he said he knew but she should not have to. And that night she curled on the couch with a blanket and a book but could not focus as the snow globe glowed beside her, and she shook it gently watching the snow swirl around the tiny silver house frozen and beautiful but untouched. Realizing that used to be her but now something was warming and stirring and it scared her how much she wanted it to keep going. Until her phone buzzed with a new message from Jason saying he was already at her parents' house and brought Belle early to help decorate and would see her soon. And Lydia's stomach flipped as she stared at the screen realizing her ex-fiancé was already there with his new girlfriend 2 days early, gripping the phone like it could anchor her because he knew exactly what he was doing and was trying to beat her to the story. And her fingers moved on instinct as she texted Ethan that they needed to go tonight because he was already there, and his reply came almost instantly saying he would be there in 20 and not to worry and that they would walk in together. And she stared at that line and for the first time in a long time she believed it. And the car ride to her parents' house was quiet but not suffocating. The kind of silence that wrapped gently around them, that blanket tucked beneath old memories. Outside the snow had started again. Slow soft flakes dusted the windshield. Lydia kept her hands folded in her lap. She did not speak much, neither did Ethan, but he kept glancing at her, not with pressure, not with pity, just presence. He reached across the console without a word and took her hand. His palm was warm. His fingers strong. Lydia did not let go. They pulled up in front of the old brick house at the edge of town just past 8 p.m. The porch glowed with soft golden lights and the smell of cinnamon and roasted him floated into the air the moment she stepped out of the car, her childhood home. It should have felt safe, but as she stood at the door hearing laughter from inside, his laughter, the knot in her stomach tightened. "Ready?" Ethan asked. She looked up. He was standing so close, shoulders back, eyes steady, not playing, not pretending. She gave a small nod. "Let's go give them something to talk about." He smiled. Not his press smile. Not the one people expected, but something quieter, something real. Her mother opened the door, gasped, then pulled Lydia into a hug so tight her feet left the ground. "You look beautiful," she whispered, eyes flicking toward Ethan like she could not believe her daughter had conjured him out of a catalog. Lydia laughed nervously. "Hi, Mom." Then her father appeared, blinking like he had seen a ghost. "So this is Ethan Ashford." Ethan stepped forward and offered his hand. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Rowan, and thank you for raising someone remarkable." Lydia's mother let out a little gasp. Her father smiled. "Well, come in before the neighbors start taking pictures." The house was warm, crowded, and full of clinking glasses and little judgmental glances. Lydia's aunts had taken over the kitchen. Her cousins were in the den playing some holiday guessing game. The tree glowed in the corner, and on its lowest branch sat a small ornament, a delicate glass house with silver-tipped pine trees, the ornament Ethan had picked. She had not wrapped it. Her mother must have found the bag and added it herself. She felt her chest squeeze. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions, too sweet cider and tight smiles. Ethan did not flinch once. He remembered names, asked questions, laughed at Uncle Henry's recycled jokes. Every time Lydia looked across the room, he was already watching her. And then Jason appeared wearing a smug sweater and a grin that had not changed since college. At his side, Belle, tall, glammed up, gorgeous, holding a tray of Christmas cookies like she belonged in a lifestyle ad. "Lydia?" Jason called, voice just loud enough to draw attention. "Didn't know you were bringing someone?" She stepped forward. "Jason, Belle, this is Ethan." Jason's smirk twitched. "That Ethan? As in on the news, Ethan?" Ethan extended his hand coolly. "The very one?" Jason looked him up and down, then gave Lydia a slow smile. "Guess you finally figured out how to trade up?" The room went uncomfortably still. Lydia's jaw tightened, but before she could speak, Ethan's hand brushed her back. "She didn't trade up," he said. "She just stopped settling." The silence cracked. A few awkward coughs, a faint oof from her younger cousin in the corner. Jason's smile stiffened. "I'll get us all a drink," he said, turning toward the kitchen. Belle followed, clutching her tray like a shield. Lydia exhaled. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Ethan said. "He's exactly who you said he was." She looked at him, grateful. Then her sister Abby sidled up, eyes wide. "I love him," she whispered. "You and Christmas?" Lydia smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to." "Well, you did. And Grandma thinks he looks like that man from the Hallmark Channel. You know, the one who always runs a bakery and wears the same coat." They both laughed, quiet, relieved. But the relief did not last. Not when Jason walked back and holding a wine glass and clinking it with a spoon. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he called. "Oh no," Lydia thought. "Don't you dare. I just want to make a quick toast." Jason set his arm casually around Belle's waist. "To love and new beginnings and getting it right the second time." Several heads turned toward Lydia. Jason smiled directly at her. "And to the ones who never gave up even after a few failed engagements." The room tensed. Lydia's stomach turned. But before she could say a word, Ethan stepped forward, took a glass, and said calmly, "To the ones who learn from heartbreak, stand taller after loss, and never settle for less than they deserve." He turned slightly, met Lydia's eyes. "And to the woman who taught me all of that." Cheers. Clink. Every glass in the room followed. Jason's smirk died where it stood. Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame this time, but from something like pride and hope. But even as people started moving again, laughing, drinking, clapping, her heart was pounding, because if this was pretend, it was getting too close, and if it wasn't, she wasn't sure how to protect herself anymore. The party began to soften after dessert. The scent of ginger and nutmeg lingered in the air. Most of the younger cousins had retreated to the den with hot cocoa and holiday movies. The older guests dozed gently in overstuffed armchairs while the kitchen hummed with the low rhythm of clinking dishes and gentle gossip, and Lydia, she sat on the floor beside the tree, heels off, legs tucked under her, as she watched the silver lights shimmer against the branches. Her sapphire dress, the one her mother said made her look like a winter princess, pulled softly around her. A delicate ornament sparkled just above her shoulder, the tiny glass house, the one Ethan had picked. "I didn't know it would mean that much," came his voice behind her. She turned, startled but softened, as she saw him kneel beside her, 2 glasses of warm mulled wine in hand. "You remembered where we hung it?" she said. "I watched you smile when you saw it." He passed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers. "That's what I remember." She exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. The house had quieted, mostly no one was paying attention to them now. The tension from Jason's stunt had faded. The fake dinner war had ended and she'd won even if she hadn't meant to. But what was growing between them now, this wasn't victory, it was something far more dangerous, far more real. I was terrified, she admitted, walking in tonight knowing he was here, that they were here. I didn't know if I'd fall apart or fake my way through it. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled something out. Lydia blinked. Her snow globe, her actual snow globe, the one from her desk. I asked your assistant if I could borrow it, he said, gently setting it between them on the rug. I needed something to remind me why we were doing this. Her throat tightened. You brought this to a family dinner. He nodded. Because it mattered to you, and that meant it had to matter to me. The soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the glass dome, tiny flecks of glitter snow swirling around the little silver house inside, just like her thoughts. I used to shake it when I was nervous, she whispered, before meetings, before interviews. It made me feel like I had a little world I could control. Ethan watched her closely. And what about now? She gave a small, sad smile. Now I know I can't control anything. He reached out, turned the globe slowly in his hands. The snow settled gentle and still. That's not true, he said quietly. You controlled tonight. Lydia let out a breathless laugh. I did not. You walked in with your head high, you didn't flinch, you faced the man who broke your heart and didn't shrink. She looked down. Because I had you next to me. Ethan tilted his head. No, he said, you had you. I was just lucky enough to witness it. The room fell silent again, except for the low hum of the heater and the faint crackle of the fire in the living room. She met his eyes and everything in her chest hurt in the best and worst way. She hadn't meant to fall for him, hadn't meant for the pretend to become real, but here she was, and he was still looking at her like she mattered. She set her wine glass down. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. He didn't ask what she meant, he knew. I'm not asking for anything, he said gently. Not tonight, not tomorrow. She blinked back, the sting behind her eyes. I just need you to know something, he added. I didn't offer to help because I wanted good PR or because I felt sorry for you or because it was easy. He leaned closer. I did it because the moment you told me your ex was coming, something in me couldn't stand the idea of you facing him alone. She swallowed hard. Ethan. He shook his head once. I know you didn't ask for this. She hesitated, then reached for the snow globe again, ran her thumb across the base. I used to think love had to be loud, she said, big gestures, flowers, fireworks, and now she looked up at him. Now I think love might be a man bringing you coffee without asking, watching your face more than his phone, carrying a snow globe in his coat pocket because you said it mattered. The silence after that was deep and holy. He reached out, took her hand, and for a long moment neither of them said anything until finally he broke the stillness. I told my family I was skipping Christmas this year, he said softly. Didn't want the questions, the pity, the why are you still alone speeches. She squeezed his hand gently. I know how that feels. But I didn't skip it, he continued, because of you. Lydia felt her heart stop and start in the same breath. Lydia, he said, voice low. I know this started as pretend, but I need to ask. He turned fully now, kneeling in front of her, her hands still in his. Would it be okay if we stopped pretending? Her lips parted, but no words came, just her heart pounding, answering, and still unsure. Lydia didn't speak right away, not because she didn't have words, but because too many of them were stacked inside her chest. Jumbled, colliding, stuck. Ethan was still kneeling there, still holding her hand, still looking at her like she wasn't just someone worth pretending to love, but someone worth choosing. And that was the problem. She wanted to say yes, she wanted to fall forward into that version of her life, the one where this man in front of her really meant everything he was saying, but wanting and trusting weren't the same thing, and trust had cost her everything once already. She pulled her hand back slowly. Gently. I don't know how to trust this, she said, barely above a whisper. Ethan's expression didn't fall, he didn't flinch, didn't pull away, he just sat back quietly, giving her space. I don't expect you to, he said. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. I thought I knew what love looked like. Jason made it easy to believe the version where I wasn't enough, not quite interesting enough, not ambitious enough, not social enough. Ethan stood too careful to stay a step behind her. You are enough, he said, steady as stone. She turned to face him. Do you believe in timing, she asked, like maybe if this was a different year, a different chapter, one wouldn't be so afraid. I believe, he said slowly, that timing gives us excuses and fear gives us armor, and sometimes love asks us to put both down. Her throat tightened again. It wasn't fair. Why did the most guarded man she knew have to be the one who saw her the clearest? He reached into his coat pocket again, held out the snow globe. I think you should keep this close, he said, tonight for yourself. She took it, almost trembling. His eyes stayed on hers, no pressure, no decision. I just needed you to know how I feel, and that whatever happens next I don't regret any of it. She didn't answer, couldn't, but she nodded once, and he understood. It was past midnight when Lydia stepped into the upstairs hallway. The house was quiet, finally, candles blown out, guests asleep, Orgone Bell's high heels had stopped clicking hours ago, and Jason's forced laughter had drifted off with the sound of car doors and snow crunching under tires. Lydia couldn't sleep, not after that moment, not with the snow globe still in her hands like a secret she didn't know what to do with. She walked quietly toward the guest room where Ethan was staying, just across from the one she always used during holidays. The door was cracked open, he wasn't inside. She turned and found him sitting on the floor at the end of the hall, back against the wall, legs stretched out, head tipped up toward the ceiling like he was trying to memorize it. He looked up when he saw her, didn't smile, but something in his eyes relaxed. "I couldn't sleep either," he said softly. She sat beside him, the old wooden floor creaked gently beneath her. For a long while they didn't say anything, then she whispered, "You scared me tonight. I know you meant it, I did." Silence again, the kind that made room for things unspoken. "You were the only person who made me feel strong tonight," she said, "even when I didn't believe it. You are strong," he said, his voice low. "You just don't know it yet." She leaned her head back against the wall. "I've spent so long trying to prove I'm okay," she murmured, "to my family, my friends, myself, and now that you're here it feels like I don't have to. You don't." And there it was again, that steady, terrifying warmth in his voice, the one that told her this wasn't a game for him, that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to keep waiting for someone to leave. She turned her head, met his eyes. "What if I mess this up?" she asked. "What if I fall for you and it goes wrong?" He didn't hesitate. "Then we'll figure it out." Her eyes brimmed. And then a noise, a sharp creak near the stairs. They both turned. A shadow moved too fast to be natural, just for a second, like someone had been standing there watching. Jason had gone upstairs to get his coat and heard enough. She stood slowly, suddenly alert. "Did you see?" But Ethan was already on his feet. He moved to the stairs, quiet and careful. Nothing, just cold air from the open hallway window at the landing. He shut it gently, locked it, but Lydia's heart was still racing. "I have a bad feeling," she murmured. Ethan looked down the stairs one more time, then back at her. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Downstairs in the dimly lit kitchen, Jason stood alone, phone in hand, a quiet, bitter smirk on his face. He wasn't wrong. He had heard something, enough, more than enough. And if Lydia thought she could win Christmas, he had just found the perfect way to ruin it. The morning after Christmas Eve was always the quietest part of the holiday, that strange in-between where half the house was asleep and the other half shuffled around in slippers, waiting for coffee and cinnamon rolls. Lydia woke early, hoping for a moment alone, but when she padded into the kitchen barefoot, wrapped in one of her dad's oversized sweaters, Ethan was already there, standing at the stove, making scrambled eggs like he'd done it 100 times, sleeves of his navy pullover pushed to his elbows, and for once he looked settled at home. Lydia leaned on the doorframe, watching him before saying softly, "You're doing it wrong." He didn't look up. "You like them soft, slow cooked, and ruined with too much chive." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't ruin them. You drown them in herbs. I season them." He finally looked at her, then a slow smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I made both," he said, gesturing to two pans. "Yours is ruin, mine's respectable." She laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from below the surface, the kind that hadn't had air in a long time. He turned off the burners, plated the eggs, and slid a warm mug across the counter toward her. "Hazelnut cinnamon, no sugar." "Do you do this for every woman you fake date?" she asked, sitting at the breakfast bar. "No," he said without hesitation. "I've never done this before." That changed the air between them again. He sat beside her. "I thought it should be here," he said quietly, "between us." She stared at the tiny house swirling in gentle white. "Feels like everything's between us," she said. His eyes met hers. "I'm ready when you are." And just like that, it was her move. She set down her coffee, looked at him long and hard. "I think I want to." The kitchen door opened. Lydia flinched. Jason, fully dressed, perfectly timed, smiling like a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Well, not really." Ethan stood, the shift in him subtle but immediate, protective, ready. Jason held up his phone, tilted it toward Lydia. "You might want to see this." She hesitated. "What is it?" "It's about your boyfriend," Jason said. "I just thought you should know before you go making things public, you know, real." Lydia frowned, stepping forward. "Jason, what are you?" 3 years ago, he cut Ethan's company cut a deal with a property developer to bulldoze 3 local bookstores in upstate New York. One of them was a historic landmark. The man who ran it, my uncle. Lydia blinked. Ethan didn't move. Jason continued scrolling through his phone. "I've got articles, internal memos, the press buried it fast, but it happened, and guess who signed off on it?" He held up the screen. "Ethan Ashford." Ethan's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "I did sign it." Lydia's stomach twisted. Jason's eyes lit up. "See, you thought he was some knight in shining armor, but he's no different than the rest of us. That deal saved 75 jobs," Ethan said. "We relocated 2 of the shops, paid out double in reparations. The 3rd building was condemned. It wasn't legally safe." Jason scoffed. "You always have an answer, don't you?" Ethan stepped closer. "I made decisions to protect an entire company, decisions I didn't always like, but I didn't hide them, and I didn't break my word to the people I loved." Jason's smile faltered just for a moment and Lydia caught it. What do you want? She asked, eyes narrowing. Why are you doing this? He shrugged. I just thought you should know who you're falling for. The room went still. Lydia's heart pounded. Ethan didn't defend himself further. He just looked at her, eyes steady, waiting. And in that moment she saw the difference. Jason came back to undo her. Ethan had only ever stood beside her. She turned slowly. Jason, she said, voice like ice, when you left me 2 years ago, you said I wasn't ambitious enough for your future, that I'd hold you back. He blinked. I didn't. You did. You said it right in this kitchen over leftover pie. And you know what I did the next morning? He stayed silent. I got up. I went to work. I kept going. She started over alone. She stepped closer, voice rising. And this man, the one you're trying to ruin, is the only person who's made me feel like I didn't have to be ashamed of that. Jason's mouth opened, then closed. Ethan touched her arm, not to stop her, just to remind her he was still there. Jason shook his head. Whatever. Don't come crying to me when he does the same thing. I won't, Lydia said firmly. Because he won't. And then she took Ethan's hand, held it in front of everyone, even herself. Later that afternoon, the house had grown quiet in the way only a home does after all the guests are gone. Leftovers sat sealed and cooling on the stove. Chairs were stacked. The scent of cinnamon rolls still lingered in the air like a whisper of something sweet and finished. Lydia stood in the upstairs hallway with bare feet on the wooden floor, one hand resting lightly on the railing. The snow globe sat in her other hand, not for comfort now, but for thought. She turned it once slowly. The snow inside swirled like it always did, but something felt different. She no longer needed it to steady her. She just wanted to remember. She heard his voice before she saw him. Soft laughter, a thank you to her mother as he helped bring the extra folding chairs down to the basement. It struck her then how quietly he moved through spaces. No need for attention, no effort to impress. And yet he filled the room. She came down the stairs just as he finished folding a tartan blanket on the couch. He turned, saw her, and smiled. Not the practiced, press-polished smile she'd seen in headlines and office hallways. This one was just for her. Your mom said you disappeared, he said gently. I needed a minute. She also said I've officially been adopted into the family and that your Aunt May is convinced I used to be on a Hallmark Christmas special. Lydia grinned. She says that about any man who wears a scarf. Ethan leaned in. Should I stop? Absolutely not. They both laughed. The kind of easy shoulder loosening laughter that comes after the storm has passed. The kind that means maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Want to go for a walk? She asked. There's a trail down the street. It's quiet. Always helps me think. He nodded once. Lead the way. The air outside was fresh and sharp. The kind of cold that bit at your cheeks and made your breath come out in clouds. Snow flurries were falling again, gentle and silent, clinging to branches and rooftops in soft white layers. Lydia tugged her coat closer around her as they walked side by side down the winding neighborhood path. The trees looked like they'd been dipped in sugar. Everything was still. I used to come here after Jason left, she said. After a while, I'd walk until I couldn't feel my feet, just so I wouldn't feel the rest of me either. Ethan didn't interrupt, just listened, present, patient. I thought if I just kept moving, eventually, I'd outrun the feeling that something was wrong with me, that I wasn't enough. His voice came low and steady. You were never the problem. I know that now, she whispered, but for a long time, I let that lie live inside me. She stopped walking, turned to face him. I was afraid you were just a new version of the same old story. He looked at her, unwavering. I understand. I didn't trust you. I know. She took a breath. Came out shaky, but sure. But I do now. His eyes softened like winter clouds before the sun breaks through. Lydia. She stepped closer, her boots crunching in the snow. I'm still scared, she admitted, still figuring out how to believe in something good. You don't have to have it all figured out. She searched his face. Saw the quiet strength there, the kindness, the truth. I think I want to try, she whispered. If you still want me. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for her, slow, sure, and pulled her gently into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping, no swelling music, no cinematic pause. It was soft, certain, real, the kiss of a man who wasn't in a hurry because he wasn't going anywhere. When they pulled apart, Lydia's heart felt like it was still leaning into his. "I choose you," she said barely above a breath. "Not just tonight, not just to prove a point or win a moment. I choose you." He smiled then, the kind that only happens once your walls have fallen for good. "And I'll keep choosing you," he said. "Every day, whether the world is watching or not." They walked back in silence, fingers entwined, like two pages finally sewn into the same book. Inside her room, the snow globe sat on the nightstand where she'd left it. She crossed the room slowly, picked it up, looked at it one last time, then placed it gently on the shelf, not hidden, not clutched, just placed with peace. "I used to hold it like a shield," she